highlight here. So everybody sees the screen okay? I think so. Awesome. All right. Well, letting us get started. Yeah, we are recording. Perfect. So this is one of my favorite topics as an accountant. Oh, here we go again. All right, let's see if we get this right. So spreadsheets have a wide variety of uses, obviously in the classroom, but I would say in business is probably the number one tool that we use in all facets of business. So basically what we're trying to do is it's a relational database that we're trying to implement within a spreadsheet. So we have rows and columns, and there's just so many fabulous ways that you can use spreadsheets, right? You can use it for calculations, lots of formulas. You can built in formulas. You can use it for predictive analysis. Goal Seek is one of my favorites. You could display it in charts and graphs and pivot tables. We even have power pivot tables. I mean, it is endless. If you don't use, one skill, you should have taken ITMG 110, which should have given you like the whole gamut of spreadsheets. But you should use it every day. I use a spreadsheet for almost everything. Your class schedule is a spreadsheet that I used. So it's pretty cool. So basically, Excel is probably the number one program that we use for spreadsheets. And again, you can calculate, you can put the numbers, you can format the numbers, you can convert tables quickly into charts. You can use it for a variety of reasons. Here we see dates and, different maybe vendors and amounts. We're constantly using spreadsheets for a whole gamut of things, but Excel is probably the number one. Google Sheets has become even more popular. Lotus used to be popular. And then numbers for Apple, if you use that, not as much. I would say Excel is definitely the industry leader here. So if anything, make sure you know Excel. So why we use spreadsheets? Basically, it helps us to organize a bunch of number data, right? And it usually helps us keep track of numbers, and budgeting and accounting are probably one of the main areas. I use it for forecasting, time series. You can also use QuickBooks in accounting, that's from Intuit, which is also the people that make TurboTax. But for most of the time, we use when we're in accounting, we use it for reconciliations. In finance, you might want to track financial trends. You might want to track stock prices. You might want to keep your grades in an Excel spreadsheet. I highly recommend that you download from D2L your grades and then check me, because sometimes I make mistakes, and sometimes when I program in D2L, it doesn't add your Excel. So please, please, please check check the grades, download your grades and make sure they're adding up right. And if something's wrong, do let me know. And if you guys are sports buffs, then you can use it to track all that fun stuff that you do in sports. I have no idea. So I will leave that to all of you sports fanatics, because I am definitely not a good sports person. So you'll have to teach me. So Excel, like I said, this is Excel, and this is probably the main one. Okay, we have here Google Sheets. Here we have Apple numbers. They're all about the same, but I would probably say Excel is the number one we use, but that doesn't mean you have to use it. Google Sheets, like I said, is probably number two. So how do we manage all of these files? So you should actually, I'm sure you know how to do this, but if you don't, make sure you know how to open an Excel file. Make sure you know how to go to the blank workbooks. So I would go through each one of these and make sure you know how to open Google Sheets if you want to use Google Sheets. Probably this, I would say you should actually do. So that way you have two bites at the apple, right? You want to make sure you have Excel, and Google Sheets is free. And if we have time, I'll show you Notebook LM as a nice little study tool, and what I use Notebook LM for, which is also free. So you should do that. So I recommend, if anything, make a note, and that slide 7, you should circle back and make sure you know how to open an Excel and open a Google Sheets, which I'm pretty sure all of you need to do. I wouldn't worry too much unless you want to use OpenOffice or Apple. I wouldn't worry too much about that. And obviously you should know how to save, right? So you want to go to File, Save. So this should be an activity that you do. Make sure you know how to save a spreadsheet in Excel. And then make sure you know how to save it as. I always recommend Excel workbook, the number one item on top. When you hit save as, you'll see it, and I'll show you this. But sometimes you might need to do a CSV file, and sometimes you might even need to do a text file right here. So these are probably the 3 most common ways. And well, if you have a macro, I use macros a lot. So you might also have a macro enabled workbook. But I would say those are the main ways. But if in doubt, just save it at the top as a Excel workbook because the CSV lets you mostly take it and put it into other programs. And sometimes if I'm uploading information into another program, usually CSV is how you have to do it, or text if you're using some, not numbers, if you're using, words, which as an accountant, words, superfluous. So same thing as you save, you just make sure you have the correct format. So XLSX is the format we want. And that's usually what we do. And then also when you're downloading from Google to Excel, that's the best way to do it too. Save as, and this is an open office. You don't have to worry too much about this. Or in iCloud, you don't have to worry too much about this unless, what I would probably recommend is to save all of your information on your OneDrive with IUP. So if you save it on OneDrive, it's cloud-based, it's also backed up. And then you can also keep track um, of the history or the file versions. And I like to have everything on the cloud, as little as possible on my hard drive, because if your hard drive crashes, which it has done to me on multiple occasions, then you're kind of stuck. You lose everything. So spreadsheet characteristics. So typically right here is a cell. So this cell is A3, right? And we see in A3, we see the word gold. So hopefully this is all a review from what you learned in ITMG 110, but that is what we call a cell, okay? And then, sorry, I don't know why it keeps moving all over the place. Jesus. So then we have an active cell. So an active cell is where you actually have your cursor. So in this case, we see it's C3, and we know that we have it here because here's our active cell. We see the nice little box around it. And so it creates that heavy border to know, hey, this is where you're entering. So again, this should all be review. You have rows and columns, right? These are your columns. They're usually in letters A, B, C. And then your rows are here, 3, 4, 5, right? So those are your rows and columns. And again, think of this as a relational database. We're trying to put information in here. So here we see investment names, we see the investment type, we see the prices as of a certain date, we see the dollar signs we can program. In Excel, we just click a button and it'll automatically add those dollar signs for us. So that's all great. Then you can enter labels into, make sure, yeah, you can enter labels into your spreadsheet, which is what I highly recommend. So you don't interact, the labels don't interact, that's a key point, with the other cells in the way it's like when we enter numbers or we enter values, but it stays on the left-hand side. And so I would do this only if you have large data sets, because I wouldn't go, if it's a small data set, I wouldn't bother going into labels. But if you have a large data set, then I would. Then we have the value. This is what you enter, right? And so hopefully you can use values for calculations. And if you don't want the number to be treated as a number, we can enter an apostrophe right before that. And Excel looks at that apostrophe and says, this is a text. So see how we have the apostrophe here? That is telling us that this is a text file, not a number file. And so that's a key distinction and something that typically students get a little kind of crazy with. So don't let that drive you crazy. The equal sign, what does that tell us? That's pretty much the most important sign in Excel. I mean, you're constantly typing equal, right? This is what we tell that this is going to be a formula. So add 2 plus 3, right? So you want the computer to do the work for you, not you, right? So the equal sign is what really helps us to make sure that we tell the Excel that this is a formula. Pointers. Each pointers mean something. I would absolutely, sorry, what is going on here? Why does this keep moving? Look at that, it just moves all by itself. I don't understand. Like it's just going crazy. Let me see if I can just do slideshow for both there. See if this will eliminate let me get rid of all of this. See if this will eliminate all that back and forth because it's driving both of us crazy, I think. All right, so we talked about values, we talked about the equal sign. No, it keeps going all crazy. Okay, the computer has a mind of its own, I tell you. So just note that the equal sign is a calculation. And so you want to make sure you enter the equal sign first to tell Excel, hey, we're going to be calculating something, or more like you're going to be calculating something. Okay. All right. Oh, I don't know why it does that. Okay, pointers. I would absolutely place this in your notes. So you want to know, so I would put these specific pointers here because you might get a question on your test where you'll see a pointer and it's asking you what it's going to do. So obviously if you see like a little arrow like you see here, then it's you need to select or activate cells. This also like cross sign will do the same. Here, these are autofills, especially this one. So if you put your cursor at the bottom of the cell and you just drag it down, that'll autofill your cells. So hopefully all of this is review, but if not, you have it again. And so that way we can commit it to memory. So I would add these pointers definitely to your concept notebook. Adjusting column heights and width, you just usually double click. That's how I do it, or you can click and drag. Not sure why this thing is going berserko. Let's see here. Let's see. All right, maybe it'll let us do it. So that's the easiest way to do that. I would go through and make sure that you know how to do all of these in Excel. Again, this is probably all review from ITMG 110, but it's good to know. If you see these, or if you see these like pound signs, that means something's wrong, right? That's like an error message. Usually a value will tell you that, hey, you're trying to add things. And in this case, you can't add, or you can't add panda. Goodness. Because it's a text file, right? And you can't add that to 20. And then sometimes when you see these pound signs, that just means that you need to expand the cell in order to make it bigger so that you could see it. So make sure you are aware of those. Moving data, that's about, right? You got to move data all the time. So it's pretty easy, copy paste, right? Or sometimes you can right click on the cell. So there you could do copy paste, you could do right click, you can move it however you want. So that's the beauty about spreadsheets or even anything electronically. You don't have to get it right the first time, right? You can move things around, you can insert rows. You can do that by just using insert rows. That's pretty much the same throughout all of the programs. You can also delete, be careful. There's always an undo button, which is fabulous. We love undo, right? Because we make mistakes. You can delete the row, which is the whole, right, across, that's horizontally, or you can delete the column, which is vertically, which is our ABCs, right? So we want, but be careful when you delete, make sure you have the undo feature available because sometimes we delete things we don't need to, which is not fabulous. So we have a fill handle. So that just makes it really easy to complete a series of information, right? So like I said, you can just double click and it'll be autofill. So if you start typing 1, 2, 3, 4, it'll continue it for you. If you start typing, 2026, it'll bring it all the way down. Just a nice, easy way to get the information done quickly for you from a data entry perspective. Selecting cells, right? So all you got to do is highlight the cell. And then, or if you're using these functions, you definitely should know how to use the sum, the average, the max, and the min. And I'll show you how I will go into Excel really quick and I'll show you some of this. But basically, when you use a sum function, which is just the sigma sign, right? The Greek letter E, which looks like this, if I did it right, something like that. Then that tells Excel, hey, sum this whole row. You can also hit like Command or Control and select cells that aren't sequentially, like all the way down. So that all works. You can freeze panes. I do this all the time, right? So you can see maybe your top headers and maybe your first column that tells you things. So you can see all of that. Make sure you know how to do that. Make sure you know how to hide and unhide cells. Usually what I do is if I'm giving a spreadsheet to someone to work on, I will hide the cells and protect the cells. So that way they don't go changing it. But best practices is as you're working with spreadsheets, do not hide things. If you don't need it, put it in another, put it in another sheet, I would say. I mean, sometimes you need to hide it, maybe to look at it more succinctly or to understand your data a little bit better. But best practices, I try not to hide things because I'll just try putting it in a different worksheet within the same workbook. So that way I have it readily available. Cell referencing, we have absolute and relative. Absolute referencing is when you add like a nice little dollar sign in front of it, which tells Excel, hey, when we copy this cell isn't going to change. Relative referencing is, okay, if I copy the formula over from one to another column, it'll change and the referencing will change. And I'll show you some of this if we have time. Sigma we mentioned is, one of the ways that we auto sum. So that's, and that's the Greek letter. So that's how we do our summations. There is an average function, which also just gives you the average. And I'll show you on the bottom of Excel how all of that works. We also have a count function. You could do count, which is to count numbers. And if you do count and if you add an A here, it'll count your alphabetic items as well. So those are two functions that are very commonly used. Max and min, and I highly you'll see all of that here. So you see where you see this little sigma here, you have all of these functions and you can even access more functions here. So these are all the main functions that I highly recommend that you learn how to use. You will use them regularly if you wanted to know how much you spent, was the maximum expense you had for your budget this week, this week or this month. Those are very fabulous functions that'll get you that information. The payment function allows you to calculate interest, right? So if you're buying a car, a house, whatever you want, you just give it all of these parameters and it'll give like the interest rate, the monthly payments that you have and the loan amount, and it'll tell you your payment. It'll also can give you an amortization schedule, which will show you how much you're paying. That will count towards the principal of your loan and what you're paying in interest each month, because there is no such thing as a free lunch. The banks want their money too. So the payment, I highly recommend, and I'll show you the function wizard, and that kind of gets you to this payment. And then you can enter also your periods, the present value, which is, you can do net present value, future value, all of that can be done in Excel. All you got to do is enter the parameters, and I'll show you how I recommend not entering it hard coded, but referring to a cell. So that way, if you refer to a cell, you can make changes and it'll automatically change it for you. So as you make those changes, that way you don't have to go right into the function. The if function is a great function as well. So for example, if the score is, so if like your cell reference is greater than 64, you get a pass or a fail. Those are nice like logical expressions that you can do in Excel. You hopefully did all of these in ITMG, but if not, you have them here. A named range, I usually name my data set. So for example, if I'm working with like the 2026 budget or the 2026 revenue transactions, you try to name them. So that way you can access the whole data set at one time, and it's very easy. You just click on the top. Pivot tables. If you don't know how to use pivot tables, you're missing out. It's so fabulous. You could just take a set of data and then with a pivot table, insert it into a new worksheet, and you can organize everything. You can organize by days, let's say your schedule and the times that you're going to class. You can organize your expenses by category or by vendor, by month. You can do subtotals. Pivot tables are your best bet. And now we even have a power pivot. We have V and H lookups. So a V lookup is basically a function where we take and we say vertically go down this list and then give me a cell reference. So look up under this row where, and then bring me back this cell reference. We do this quite a bit in business. I did this quite a bit when I was working with budgets, right? Or working with monthly data. And I needed to have, let's say, June's information. So bring in from my whole months, bring in June's information so I can analyze it to June of prior year, for example. So what you would want to do is make sure you know how to create a VLOOKUP. And so kind of go through this process here and make sure you know how to do a VLOOKUP and an HLOOKUP. And so hopefully these two functions you should absolutely know how to do. So VLOOKUP is a vertical lookup, HLOOKUP is a horizontal lookup. And the best way to do this is through the formula wizard, which hopefully we'll be able to show here. Charts and graphs, again, something so easy. And actually Excel now has charts that it'll even predict the charts for you, but you can actually assign a different design, the formats, the styles, if you want a bar graph, if you want a pie, circle, whatever, you could do scatter plots. I mean, Excel is so robust in all of the charts that they have. So here's an example of a bar graph, right? And we see, chocolate frogs and muggle wands, whatever those are. But make sure you know these terms. Obviously, the title of this is right here, investments. right? And then you have your axis. So your x-axis is this way, your y-axis is vertically, and then your legend usually tells you right here what we're looking at. So, and these are all actual basics of a chart. So please do not have what I call naked numbers or naked charts. You want every number to have some categorization, right? Whether it's what they are in this case, chocolate frogs or muggle wands, or and then we want to know what each items are. And then we love the colors. Now the colors could be controversial because so many people are colorblind, but it does help visually present the information. Typically in business, we start with Excel, and then if we need more robust visualizations, we'll use Tableau and we'll use Power BI. Those are probably the top two. So adding chart elements is right here. This is another feature in Excel, and these are all the things you can do. Like you can add the access, the titles, the chart title, the data labels. So all of these items, you can even, if you're doing regressions, add a trend line. I would always say to add a legend. I like to add the grid lines because that way I like to see where the items fall, and that's just, where like all the lines at the end. I definitely recommend your data labels, the chart title, and the access title. So most of this, and usually once you select your data, Excel pretty much comes up with this automatically, but you have the ability to change it. Colors in spreadsheets. That usually, in accounting, we love colors. Typically, a light blue color in a cell tells us in accounting that we need to enter data. Usually, if we leave the cells white, then that means there's a formula in there. Don't enter data. So usually a light blue is how we show that, hey, you should be entering data in here. But there's a whole color scheme that you can have. And you can also do color coding with conditional formatting as well. So I also recommend that. And so the color theory basically tells you that you're trying to, attempt to describe how things are via the color. So usually we like the way that certain colors are. So there are warm and cool colors, right? And those can be nice to bring data forward or to make your data like really resonate with viewers. And red through yellow hues and including browns, those are the warm colors. But then you might have cool colors, which are more my style, like the green through the violet. So just depends what you like, but there is a reason and a purpose behind the color. So the color wheel is what uses the basic color theory, and that's just when you're trying to find the color that would best display your spreadsheet information. So you want complementary colors, and if you're on opposite sides, that would provide the greater contrast. But so there is some thought behind the colors in spreadsheets most of the time. So when you color code spreadsheets, usually when we always display numbers, if it's a negative number, like you see here, if it's usually we try to put it in parentheses, and so or in red. So red is you're losing, right? You have a loss, you're in the red. So you see right here these numbers, instead of having a little minus in front, if we're talking financially, we would probably put them in parentheses. And we can also program that pretty easy in Excel as well. Math principles. Hopefully you remember, right? The order of operations. Oh, sorry, Jesus. The order of operations for a spreadsheet, right? So the spreadsheet follows the same thing. If you enter 3 times 2 minus 1, you will hopefully get 5, right? Because it's going to take, and then, it's going to take 3 times 2, which is 6, minus 1 is 5. But then if you enter it like you see here, you're telling Excel now to do this first, which is 2 minus 1 is 1. So that would be 3 times 1. So that's how we put in parentheses to tell Excel what math operation to do first. Okay. So that's also important because you might not get the information that you need. And so multiplication in Excel is just an asterisk. So it's not an X. Some people do that. And then division is usually a slash. And so when you're calculating percentages, you're using the asterisk. And then when you see it's 0.21, you multiply it by 100 to get to the 21%. There is also a function that looks like a percentage in Excel, just like this. And you can click that and it'll automatically create it for you. And hopefully I'll show you some of this. Average, we know, is basically you're taking the sum of the set and dividing it by the numbers, but we can also do a median, which is the midpoint, and a mode, which is the most frequently occurring, amount. So, and hopefully you've learned all of this in stats, but if not, you will. But there are formulas in Excel for this, which is pretty cool too. Then parts of a payment. So for my finance folks, we have a present value function. We can calculate the interest rate. We can also calculate your annual percentage rate, which is usually what you pay for your credit cards. You can also enter in the term of the loan. And a period is just a payment, right? So in Excel. So just kind of, so it's a little bit of different terminology. So make sure you note those. Present value. So the principal is the amount of money that you're borrowing, right? And then at the time of the loan is taken out, the principal is also the present value. So, okay, because then we have a future value, what that amount would earn you in the future because of this wonderful thing called compound interest, which is fabulous. And interest rates, right? That's the cost of borrowing money. Nothing is free, right? So if a bank gives you a loan, they want interest for it. And some of the times they'll give you an annual percentage rate. And that's very typical with credit cards, right? You're borrowing the money that they're paying for you until you pay at the end of the month. And if you keep a balance, then you're keep paying interest on that. So whether you're getting a car, a mortgage, anything of the sort, you're going to pay interest. Collateral on that interest is where you put the asset as collateral or the asset to help secure the loan. So if you don't pay your car loan, they repossess your car. If you don't pay your mortgage, they take over your house. And student loans are also, if you, the government is what guarantees the provider or the lender in the case of the student loan. So if you don't pay your student loans, which you can't get out of those, you can't file bankruptcy on your student loans. You'll have to pay those until you pay them down. So, like for example, if you don't pay your car or your house, you file for bankruptcy. They'll take the car and the house, but then you're free of the debt. Not so much in student loans, so be careful about that. So we said that the payment period is just anytime you make a payment, that's considered a period. So obviously, if you have a 60-month or 5-year car loan, each month is a period, and each payment you'd have to make unless you're making them quarterly. But most loans make payments monthly. So a present value of a loan is basically the amount of the money that you borrowed. So if you have a $25,000 car loan, then your present value is $25,000. The future value is the money, the amount of the loan that is worth to the lender. So if you borrow $20,000 for 5 years at 10%, then when we do the calculations, that means that the future value will be $25,500, which is what you're paying for that loan. So for those 5 years, you're paying $5,500 to the lender for allowing you to borrow that money. Excellent. You made it. Look at that.